They told you the end was coming, not as a process, but as a moment, a single rupture in time, a final event that would divide reality into before and after, a clean line, a final chapter, a point where everything would stop and something else would begin. But look closer. That moment never arrived. Not once, not completely, not in the way you were promised. And that failure is not accidental. It is structural, because the moment an apocalypse truly arrives, it ends. And anything that ends loses its ability to control. So the system was adjusted, not removed, not abandoned, redesigned, not as an event, but as a loop. The word revelation was never meant to be read the way you were taught. You were trained to see it as prediction, a warning about something ahead of you, something approaching, something you must prepare for. But the original meaning is far more precise. Revelation means unveiling, disclosure, the removal of a veil. Not what will happen, but what is already happening, just hidden beneath perception. And that is the first fracture. Because the moment you realize that revelation is not about the future, the entire structure begins to shift beneath your feet. If revelation is not describing a timeline, then what are you actually reading? You are reading a pattern, a repeating system, a mechanism that cycles through civilizations, belief structures, and human perception itself. And once you recognize it as a mechanism, you stop asking when it will happen and begin seeing where it already has. You were trained to wait. That part is critical. To watch the skies, to decode symbols, to interpret disruption as signal, to live inside a constant state of anticipation. But anticipation is not neutral. It creates tension, and tension creates compliance, because a mind waiting for collapse is easier to guide, easier to influence, easier to control. So every failed prediction, every incorrect date, every prophecy that collapsed under its own weight did not weaken the system. It reinforced it, because it kept you watching, still waiting, still expecting. That is not failure. That is design. A one-time apocalypse has a flaw. It expires. Once it happens, belief is no longer required. But a continuous apocalypse, a rolling collapse, a repeating pattern of almost the end, never loses power, because it never resolves. Now look at history, without labels. Remove the names, remove the dates, remove the stories you were given. What remains is structure. Civilizations rise. They centralize power, expand influence, reach a peak of complexity and control. Then something fractures. Internal conflict, external pressure, economic instability, then collapse, then reset, then rebuild. Again, again, again. You call this history, but structurally, it is recursion. Revelation did not describe a timeline. It described this mechanism, using symbols, beasts, seals, trumpets, judgments, not literal events, but symbolic representations of repeating processes. Take the beast. You were told it is a future entity, a singular force that will appear at the end of time. But observe reality closely. Every empire exhibits the same structure: centralized authority, control through identity, manipulation through fear, dependence on belief. That is the beast. Every empire exhibits the same structure: centralized authority, control through identity, manipulation through fear, dependence on belief. That is the beast, not a creature, a pattern of power. And because it is a pattern, it does not die. It adapts, it evolves, it changes form. The mark follows the same logic. It was framed as something physical, something external, something imposed. But the deeper mechanism is behavioral. The mark is not something you receive. It is something you perform. It exists in what you accept, what you refuse to question, what you align with to maintain comfort or safety. It is compliance. encoded into action, not on your skin, but in your decisions. Now reconsider the idea of the end. You were taught to imagine destruction, fire, collapse, total annihilation. But systems do not need to physically end to lose their power. They only need to be seen, because invisibility is their greatest strength. So the end is not destruction. It is exposure, a collapse of perception, a moment where your understanding of reality no longer holds. In physics, a system can exist in multiple potential states, not fixed, not determined, only probabilities, until observation occurs. And in that moment, the system collapses into a single outcome. Now apply that structurally. The apocalypse behaves the same way. It is not a fixed future event. It is a constant field of potential collapse, always present, always possible, but not activated until it is perceived. This is why every generation believes they are the last, because conditions align in a way that makes collapse feel immediate. Wars escalate, diseases spread, economies destabilize, and each time the same conclusion emerges. This is it. This is the end. But what follows is always the same. Fear increases. Belief intensifies. Authority expands. Then the system stabilizes. Not because the threat disappeared, but because it was absorbed. You have experienced this, personally, more than once. You just use different words. Crisis, loss, transformation, awakening. Each time, a version of your reality collapsed, and a new one replaced it. This is the key. Perception is the trigger. Events are neutral. Interpretation activates the system. Two people can experience the same moment and enter completely different realities. One collapses, another adapts. Same world, different apocalypse. This is where the system becomes self-sustaining. Because once perception becomes the trigger, external control is no longer required. The system runs internally. Religion did not just describe this system, it installed it. By embedding the expectation of an ending, it conditioned generations to interpret reality through collapse. Expectation leads to interpretation. Interpretation leads to reinforcement. And now the system sustains itself. The most effective system of control is the one you believe has not started yet. Because you do not resist it, you prepare for it, you fear it, you anticipate it, and in doing so, you keep it alive. Meanwhile, it has already begun. So the real question is no longer, when will the apocalypse happen? But how many times has it already happened to you? Moments where everything you believed stopped making sense. Moments where your identity shifted, where your perception collapsed, where you were forced to rebuild from nothing. Those were not random. They followed a pattern. And now, you can see it, which changes everything. Because once you recognize the loop, you are no longer inside it unconsciously. You are observing it as it runs. And that creates a separation, a gap, between you and the system. But that awareness comes with a cost. It removes certainty. It removes simplicity. It removes the comfort of a fixed narrative. And what remains is something unfamiliar. Not the end of the world, but the end of believing the world was ever fixed to begin with. And that realization feels exactly like an apocalypse. This has been Unmasking the Gods, revealing the truth behind power and myth.